Hello, this is Sightline. Today in our studio, Mr. Vinod Ahuja, country representative of the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations in Mongolia, has arrived to discuss the food security and development in Mongolia. So thank you for coming, Mr. Vinod Ahuja.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation and the opportunity. We're really pleased to be here.
It's our pleasure. So let's start our talk by discussing the sustainability of the typical food security of Mongolians, as FAO's mandate is food security and nutrition. So what's the situation in Mongolia like?
As you know, FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, our mandate really is to work for eliminating hunger from the world and eliminating, in fact, not just hunger, but all forms of malnutrition, and doing so in a way that we do not impose huge costs on the environment. Now, when it comes to food security and nutrition situation in Mongolia, it depends upon how you look at it in terms of which indicator of food security and nutrition you are looking at. Generally, we look at what we call prevalence of undernourishment. Prevalence of undernourishment is about whether people have sufficient calories, they are actually having access to sufficient calories to lead a healthy and active life. We also look at experienced food insecurity, whether people are experiencing food insecurity. And then there are nutrition indicators, particularly for children, whether they are growing sufficiently as per their age or whether they are gaining sufficient weights. So when you look at the child undernutrition, like what we call stunting, which means height for their age, or wasting, the weight for their age, I think on those two indicators, Mongolia has done very well. Mongolia's wasting rates are already less than 1%, which is actually quite remarkable. And in terms of reducing the stunting levels, Mongolia's rate of achievements I have not seen anywhere else in the world. But when I start looking at other indicators, prevalence of undernourishment, whether people are able to access enough calories to lead a healthy and active life, our estimates are that more than 500,000 are still not able to get that.
In Mongolia?
Yes. Now, for a country of 3.3, 2.2 million, that's quite a big number.
Yes.
When we talk with the people whether they are experiencing food insecurity, our estimates are about 200,000 people are still experiencing food insecurity, which means either they are compromising on food or they are compromising on food quality. And then when we look at beyond those indicators, the vitamins and mineral deficiencies. In fact, some of the estimates that we have, particularly for prevalence of anemia amongst women of reproductive age, it's about 20%, which is quite high. So that's one side of the story. The other side is that we are also seeing obesity levels rising. So the child obesity levels are rising and adult obesity levels are rising. So in some sense, you have this what we call the double burden of malnutrition. And if you look at the diet, a Mongolian diet, you know very well. I mean, it's very heavy in meat.
It consists of a lot of meat because we think we live in a harsh environment, so we need lots of meat from our livestock.
But we at FAO are now, we really emphasize on dietary diversity to have a sufficient intake of fruits and vegetables. I think that's very important. And even when you talk about the harsh climate, I mean, if you look at Mongolia, about 50 to 60% of the people are living in Ulaanbaatar. They are very urban, typical urban population now. If you go anywhere else, if you go to Delhi, New Delhi, where my country, and here, it is the same story. We are eating the same kind of food.
You also mentioned the term of cost of the food. And actually, I watched your TED Talk, and you said that our food that we are paying costs more than actually what we are paying for. And I think lots of people would agree on that too. And in Mongolia, we depend a lot on our agriculture and livestock husbandry. And what would you say about the degradation issues? More than half of our rangeland is degrading or altered to some level. So what kind of actions has the FAO in Mongolia been doing to solve this problem?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I think that is really is a big issue. We often impose disproportionate costs on the environment when we produce our foods, and as you said, rangeland degradation is one example. There's also loss of biodiversity, which is another example. But coming to the issue of rangelands, one is, of course, and as you know, the number of livestock that Mongolia is raising has risen. I think last numbers were about 70 million or 80 million, whereas the carrying capacity is probably not more than half of that. Mm-hmm. So that puts huge pressure on pastures, on grasslands, and so on. For a long time, we have, along with others, of course, we have been advocating for a bit more regulated access to these pastures, particularly imposing some tax and fees on pasture use, which the government has now passed the law. Mm-hmm. We are hopeful that that will have some impact on regulating the number of livestock. But that's only one part of the story. Mm-hmm. We really need to look beyond that. One is that we really have to invest in raising quality animals as opposed to quantity. Mm-hmm. If you can raise quality animals, that means the herders or the livestock producers don't necessarily need to invest in so many animals, right? The other is, I think the land management and land use planning also is somewhat fragmented. So when we are looking for, planning land use for urban uses or for mining, we are really not looking at its impacts on degradation of land and on biodiversity. So we need to promote more integrated land use planning, and this is what we are working on. Mm-hmm. And the third thing I would also say that I think we also need to look at some more climate smart production practices, mm-hmm. particularly investing in more climate smart crop production practices and fodder production practices.
Mm-hmm. You're working to advocate people to have to choose quality over quantity, mm-hmm. And to reduce the number of livestock, and also the land use planning. And could you give examples of the climate smart practices?
Yeah, so the climate smart practices, or shall I say that the climate smart is more like an approach. Mm-hmm. And when we talk about climate smart approach, there are three things we are looking at. One is, how do you improve productivity and profitability? Second, how do you reduce methane or the greenhouse gases? In case of livestock, it tends to be more methane. So how do you reduce greenhouse gas emissions? And the third is, how do you make these systems more resilient and more adaptable to climate change? So let me just give you one example. In the case of livestock, for example, if you can, there's a lot of experience outside of Mongolia, at least, that if you can balance the feed that you give to your animals, it can reduce emissions. It can make your animals healthier, and it can actually improve your productivity and profitability. Mm. But this kind of knowledge needs to be disseminated to producers and herders. So that's an example of climate smart practice. Mm. We are also trying to do some pilots here in Mongolia to look at, how can you do more let's say, more cost-effective fodder production.
Cost-effective?
Fodder production. Rather than just leaving it on grass, you can produce fodder and feed and these fodder, then you can actually bring in fodder varieties which are high in fiber, high in protein, and those kind of nutrients, so that you can give better feed to your animals, which will make them more productive, mm-hmm. at the same time will impose less cost on the environment. Mm-hmm. Also, there are so many feed additives that are available that you can add, and that really makes the rumen of the livestock more healthy, and then that way the livestock grow better. So these are different ways that we work with in different situations, and it varies from situation to situation. But as I said, our principle is improve productivity, reduce greenhouse gases, and improve adaptability to climate.
Yeah, and also the FAO Mongolia said that you're using, you are trying to support the development and implementation of e-agriculture project. So what are the benefits of using ICT in agriculture, especially in Mongolia?
I think Mongolia is actually very uniquely placed to take advantage of information and communication technologies in raising the efficiency of agriculture sector. We have, you know, that there's a huge, vast territory, small population, concentrated in certain urban centers and otherwise. So it's a very unique setting, and also the seasons. Information and communication technologies can help us in many ways in improving access to markets, in sort of developing databases that then we can use to raise the quality of the animals and so on. There are many, many ways that we can apply. The question really is, where do you invest, right? Which applications do you invest? Where do you deploy the ICT? What we do at FAO, our approach really is to take a bit more strategic approach. So we look at two things. One is the country ready with the ICT infrastructure? Second, is the country ready with policy environment to promote ICT? And when I say policy environment, it's about data privacy, it's about data interoperability. There are a number of those issues. And then we decide, then we advise the governments as to where to invest. So that process we have gone through along with the government. And now we have developed a list of several applications that the government should invest in. On our recommendation, the Ministry of Agriculture also created an ICT division in the ministry now. And now we are investing in some capacity there in improving the capacity of people in doing a more strategic thinking on that. And we are investing in traceability applications, database development, particularly, like say, plant origin databases, databases to register agrochemicals. So there are a number of those applications that we are doing.
You've been working on lots of sectors, trying to make them ready for this change, and also implementing traceability and animal registration.
Yes, yes.
So what are some other innovative ways to meet our food and nutrition needs?
Yeah, so again, I want to go back to the context of Mongolia, vast territory, small population. You know, I come from India, and for us, we are a dairy nation. Milk is very much part of our diet. And India used to be milk deficient, but currently it is the #1 producer of milk, and it's even exporting milk and milk products. Now, when I come to Mongolia, I see again there is a tradition of milk, but Mongolia is importing milk powder from other countries. We are not even using what we have in here. And part of it is because, yes, it's a perishable product, and it's not easy to just milk a cow in Huskul and then bring it to Ulaanbaatar and sell it here. And the processing costs are sometimes very high, the distribution costs and the transportation costs are very high, so it's not profitable. One innovation that we want to promote is local value chains. You do a local production, local procurement, local processing, local consumption. And I think if you can promote some of those models, this would be really wonderful for Mongolia. You can actually get local products. And we want to do this for milk, and we have already tried this in about 6 IMEX. We do we set up a milk collection system where herders can bring the milk. These milk collection systems are run by local women, and then it goes to a small-scale processing, and these small-scale processing are also run by women. And then they can sell it in the SOM and IMEC markets on different kinds of products that they can make. They don't have to import products, ice cream, yogurt, drinking yogurt, all the new kind of products. They can actually process it at a small scale level and sell it. We are now talking to the Ministry of Education and Ministry of Agriculture to try and do a pilot where we can do local milk procurement. and local processing, and then it goes to the schools.
Local schools.
And so children get the nutrition, local people get the employment, and herders get a good price for their milk.
Due to the fact that the infrastructure is not good, lots of food is wasted actually in the process of manufacturing. And what is the situation of food waste during the manufacturing process? It's like in Mongolia. We're a developing nation, so it can be an issue.
Yeah. So food loss, we say food loss and food waste. And the way we distinguish between food loss and waste is, loss is something that we lose the food before it reaches the table, right? So that's because the infrastructure is poor, because of the processing is bad, because the transportation is a problem, or because we don't have the right technology. So that's the loss part. Waste is that when it reaches your table and then you still don't eat it and it goes to the waste or the dustbin. That's what we call waste. Now, at a global level, of course, it's a huge problem. I mean, I think the global estimates are that about a third of food that we produce in this world actually doesn't get eaten. And that's a huge cost,
Yeah.
About 1 billion tons of it.
It's actually enough to feed the hundreds of millions of starving people.
Yeah, exactly. And on the other hand, we have about 800 million people who are not getting enough. So I think this is something that we have to collectively solve. But the issue also is that how do you solve it is going to be very specific to that a particular situation. Do we have enough data to really know how much are we losing and where we are losing it? And then how can we save it? Unfortunately, that data at the country level is very, very poor. So it's difficult to have a more specific recommendations. But at the same time, I don't think we actually have to wait for all the data and then design the solutions. Partly we know that there is food is being wasted, and if we can only invest in the awareness, particularly among the young people, and here in Mongolia I'm very encouraged. I think when I talk to young people, they're very aware of their social responsibilities. Sometimes it's just a question of giving them more information. So youth can really lead the change, and I think raising awareness about this issue at different levels, including at the level of the government, I think is the first starting point. And we have worked with some youth agencies which have taken up this cause. We would now like to work with other institutions as well. So this is one big issue to tackle.
The food loss is maybe because we're lacking the storage, or that there is a problem in the transportation. But about the food waste of the ready-to-eat food, it's actually entirely the consumer's fault. So why aren't there strict measures that can regulate this issue?
Yeah, I mean, the regulation is one way to deal with it. But then again, I will go back to the other point, the point that I was making earlier, is that for the regulations to be, well, first of all, for you to design effective regulations and then to implement those effective regulations, you really need to have good information.
We don't need that data.
Yeah, and we don't have that data, right? I know, for example, one country where they are trying to do a regulation in Japan. They have brought in some regulation, not on the consumers, but on the retailers and processors. And retailers, for example, retailers above a certain size are now by law required to report on food loss and food waste. And if the food waste and food loss exceeds a certain permissible limit, then they get penalized. So they are trying to bring in those. But that means that they can actually monitor this. Here we don't have that information. So I think for now, while we build this information, one way is to work with youth, again, young people, to actually raise awareness about, even at the school level, I would say, raise awareness about these things, and that can make a big difference. Also, leaders can lead, and then, I know, for example, in China, the president of China was trying to promote a campaign called Clean Your Plate.
Yeah.
Yeah. Here, not here, but in
hashtag. Right.
Sorry. So these are the kind of some of the signals that can go then to the restaurants, to people in general, to raise awareness about this issue.
Okay, so unfortunately our time is coming to an end. Thank you, Mr. Ahuja, and also thank you for giving us this great message.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity again.